Pa-ba-da-bum, pum 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 pum, pa-da-bum. Hello, this is my homemade battery solar power system I've built on my office shed here in the back garden of my house in the northwest of the United Kingdom. I explain all about it in my previous YouTube video. If you've not seen it, I recommend watching that first, then this video will make a lot more sense. At the end of that video, I threatened to make another if the system managed to go for a whole month off-grid. Well, it managed substantially more than a month off-grid, but it's taken me longer to get round to making this video than I thought. So here's a summary of how it performed in 2020.
Living in good old Blighty, the sun in January is as good as a sieve with no holes in it.
So the batteries never got up to charge to run the office, so it was powered 100% from our national grid electricity supply. In February, there started being enough daylight to get the office running off-grid. All the brown areas are the times when the office was being powered from the national grid, but the green areas are the times when the office was running off-grid, powered completely from the 12 rooftop solar panels, backed up by the battery bricks in the power cabinet. March is looking even more green, with only the odd times when the system had to switch back to drawing power from the grid. April is almost completely green, and May the 19th was just annoying. June ran completely off-grid, as did July, as did August. September is when the daylight starts dropping, and the system had to switch back to grid on a couple of occasions. October, autumn's properly arrived, and everything starts turning brown again. November, only a few occasions off-grid. December, I took no readings because there was nothing worth recording. Throughout 2020, I've been building more battery bricks, adding them into the system as time and funds have allowed. By the start of April, there were 14 bricks online, and by the end of June, I had 16 bricks online. The amount of energy I can store in each brick varies, depending on how good the batch of cells is that I've used to build it. These are quite a good batch, about 2,800–2,900 mAh per cell. At the end of June, I had 16 bricks online, and from the readings I took, I calculated that the system stored just under 14 kilowatt hours of power, which works out at a little under of 1 kilowatt hour on average per brick. In the previous video, I explained the basics of the system, so now I'm going to do a technical deep dive into how I build the battery bricks. As also highlighted on the previous video, messing around with mains voltages and lithium-ion batteries has the tendency to be slightly lethal, or cause raging infernos of fiery death when not handled with proper care and attention, so don't do this at home. And if you really must, don't come complaining to me if it makes you dead or otherwise inconveniences your health. Right, safety warning out of the way, I'm going to go back to battery basics. So, pause the video, get yourself a nice cup of tea and a biscuit. For my American friends, a biscuit is the proper word for a cookie. Okay, are you ready? We're going to do some nice gentle maths and physics. Maths and physics. The cells I use in my system are called 18650s. They look very much like a normal AA battery, like the kind you'd have in your TV remote with a positive end and a negative end, but they're a bit bigger and they're chock full of lithium-ion rechargeable goodness. I use second-hand ones, recycled from old laptop batteries, medical devices, e-bikes, that kind of thing. So they've all had a useful life already, but with a bit of loving care and attention, they can still do more good work. So, first off, why are they called 18650s? Well, it's because they're 18mm in diameter and 65mm long and If you look up the voltage of 18650s, you'll find they're sometimes listed as being 3.7 volts, sometimes 3.8 volts. It's like, make your mind up, battery. What voltage are you, you pesky little thing? Settle down, it's all quite simple. An 18650 is fully charged at 4.2 volts, and as it discharges, its voltage goes down gradually until it reaches about 3.3 volts when it's empty. 3.7 volts or 3.8 volts is what's usually called the working voltage or rated voltage. It's kind of like the average of the cell as it discharges. Some manufacturers call them 3.7, some call them 3.8. You see? This is obviously a highly simplified explanation, but basically correct. Now, hold on just a flipping minute, Mr. Gill. You just said it's still got 3.3 volts in it. How can that be empty? 0 volts is empty, right? What's going on? Aha! Well spotted, you clever little physics padawan.
But perfectly good explanation there is.
I don't claim to be an expert at battery chemistry, but as far as I understand it, it's like this. Say your battery is at 3.3 volts, and you try and suck more power out of it. The poor, worn-out little cell goes, nope. And although it will give you a dribbling of power, its amps are all gone, and the more you try and suck power out of it, the more the exhausted little thing's voltage plummets. And if it drops down below about 2 volts, you just end up permanently damaging it. So I'm kind to my poor little second-hand cells. They've had a good life already, and seeing as this is their retirement, I don't discharge them below 3.3 volts. This is the brains of the system, the charge controller and inverter. This model is a Voltacon 5 kVA 48 volt off-grid dual MPPT solar charge controller and inverter. There are 2 separate solar panel power inputs. Each one can handle a maximum of 145 volts, but they work best between the range of 60 to 115 volts. 6 of my solar panels face east and the other 6 face west, and they each produce a maximum of 39 volts each in full sun. So I've wired the solar panels 3 in series, which means that when the panels are in full sun, they produce a maximum voltage of 117 volts, which is only slightly out of the optimum range, but well within the 145 volt maximum. Because this is a 48 volt system, the controller then converts that voltage down to 48 volts to charge the batteries. I've designed it such that I can keep adding 48 volt battery bricks for as long as I've got room in the cabinet. Now, the educationally gifted amongst you might have noticed that 4.2 volts is not 48 volts. We obviously can't just connect the 18650 cells directly to the system as they are, but fret ye not. Ye might also recall from your elementary physics that if you connect cells in series, positive to negative, the voltages add up. For example, 3 fully charged cells, seriesed up, would give you 12.6 volts, going down to 9.9 volts when they're empty. So let's just keep adding 4.2 volt cells, and if you do, you'll find you can't get to exactly 48 volts. Well, that's just rude. 11 cells gives you 46.2 and 12 cells gives you 50.4 volts. I know I said earlier that the Voltacon is a 48 volt system, which is true, but it's also programmable and you can adjust the charge voltage to whatever you want, up to a maximum of 60 volts. Next, I'll explain how I decided to configure the cells in my battery bricks, but first I need to take a step back and show you this neat little app that allows you to control the system from the comfort of your PC. Here's how I've got mine set up. There's a lot of telemetry on here, but there's only 3 important settings to look at now. The first is the fully charged voltage value, which is set here. This system is actually designed for charging lead-acid batteries, so it has 2 different settings for what's called bulk and float voltages, but those don't apply to lithium-ion. So I've gone ahead and set both the bulk and float to the same value, 57.5 volts. I'll come back to why I've chosen 57.5 in a moment. The next most important setting is the back to grid setting, which tells the system what voltage your batteries should be at when they're empty. I've set my system to 47 volts, which again I'll come back to later. Back to the batteries. When the system is on grid and the batteries are being charged up, this setting allows you to choose how full you want the batteries to be before it switches from the grid and back to drawing power from the batteries. When the system has switched back off grid, if the solar panels are generating more power than is currently being drawn, then the batteries will continue to charge even while off grid. Going back to the battery bricks, 11 cells gives a full charge of 46.2 volts and 12 cells gives a full charge of 50.4 volts. For reasons that may become clear, I build my battery bricks out of 14 cells in series. I stack them up like this in a zigzag fashion for ease of construction. 14 cells fully charged at 4.2 volts per cell is 58.8 volts. But, as I mentioned only a few moments ago, I'm only charging them to 57.5 volts, which means each cell is only charged to 4.11 volts, not 4.2. Why would I not charge them up to full charge, I hear you ask? I will explain, I hear myself reply. Remember, these are recycled cells. They've already worked hard all their lives, and now they deserve a little R&R in their retirement. 4.11 volts is only 90% charged, which puts less stress on them. Undercharging them like this means the cells can be charged and discharged many more times before they eventually lose their ability to hold charge. And remember, for a significant portion of the year, these cells are being charged and discharged on a 24-hour cycle. So at the expense of a bit of daily power, their overall lifetime can be extended significantly. It's exactly the same reason that I've chosen a shutoff voltage of 47 volts. If I was discharging each cell all the way to 3.3 volts, then for the whole brick, the shutoff voltage should be 46.2 volts. But shutting them off early at 47 volts means they still have a teensy bit of power left in them. Doing this also helps extend their life and rechargeability. To make one of my battery bricks, I put 8 of these zigzag strings of cells together and wire them in parallel with copper bus bars made from the cores of 2.5mm mains wiring cable. The kind of thing you'd use when installing new sockets in your house. You might recall from your elementary physics that if you put cells in parallel, the current adds up, not the voltage. So, by using 8 strings, I'm increasing the amount of power I can get from the brick by 8 times without changing the working voltages. There's no special reason why I chose 8, it just makes a practical sized battery brick that isn't too heavy to lug around, and each one gives me a decent amount of power. I can safely pull from one of these bricks 500 watts with no significant stress to the cells. That's enough maths and physics for now. Yes, I know, but we need to actually build these suckers. 14 cells in series by 8 cells in parallel is 112 cells in a brick, and they need to be held together somehow. And for that, we need frames. A bag of 20 frames like this costs about £9 on eBay. They're designed specifically for holding together 18650 cells, which is handy. They have these little interlocking wedges, so they click together quite nicely. The first thing to do is assemble them into the right size, 14 by 8 cells. Each framelet is 5 by 4, so 6 of them makes up a 15 by 8 frame, which is one row too long. To demonstrate that 15 is one more than 14, I have helpfully shown you in this video clip here. After I've hacked off the unnecessary row, it's on to populating the brick. I used to collect old laptop batteries and recycle the cells myself, but recently I've been buying my recycled cells off eBay. I'm happy to let someone else crack open the laptop batteries, test and grade the cells for me, and they arrive in handy little cardboard boxes, and I just fill up the bricks with cells. The cells going into this one are mostly around 2600 to 2900 mAh, which isn't too bad. One brick full of these will provide about 1 kilowatt hour of energy storage. I'm making sure to get each row the right way round for the zigzag series wiring. Getting them the wrong way round is a great way to kill off your cells. When the brick is fully loaded with cells, the top frame goes on like that, and there you have a 48 volt brick all ready for wiring up. Copper bus bars. These are the thin copper rods that connect each row of 8 cells together in parallel, stripped out of the mains installation cable as described earlier. I lay them out roughly where they need to go, in between each row of cells. Then it's time to crack out the araldite and get them glued on. A quick note about good cell safety. If you rummage around on YouTube, you'll find plenty of videos of people torturing these 18650s to show how dangerous they are. The poor little things get bludgeoned to death, blowtorched to death, heat gunned to death. They're tough little cookies, but sadly they always end up either exploding their tops off or bursting into fire. Good to know that I shouldn't bludgeon or blowtorch my cells, so I won't do that. However, it is necessary to safeguard against short-circuiting. By that, I mean that the positive end of a cell may accidentally get directly connected to the negative end, and if that happens, these little blighters deliver a stonking amount of current, like 30-40 amps, before getting themselves so hot they go into what's called thermal runaway. In other words, they set themselves on fire. Lithium burns very hot, very quickly, and once on fire, you ain't putting it out. You just have to wait until they burn themselves out. Again, if you look on YouTube, you'll find videos of clever people who've put one of these cells in their trouser pocket with their keys and change, whereupon they get shorted out and fires burst forth from their pants. Very spectacular, very dangerous. Never put one of these cells in a pocket. To make sure there aren't any unexpected surprises with my bricks, I'm going to use fuse wire to connect the cells to the bus bars. That way, if anything goes wrong with the cells or the wiring for whatever reason, the fuse wire will blow and the cell will be safe. 18650s can safely deliver a maximum of around 10 amps before you start getting into overheating problems, although these are recycled cells, so I'm not going to push them anywhere near that hard. I've got a test cell here that I've put into this holder, and I'm going to deliberately short circuit it with fuse wire and see what happens. I'm using 3 amp fuse wire, which blows out at around 5 amps. The fuse wire takes a second or two to blow, and it's all over. Quite uneventful, quite safe, just how I like it. In normal operation, there'll be less than 1 amp being drawn from each cell, well below the 3 amp fuse rating, so that's all good. All I need to do now is actually wire up the cells to the bus bars. I've cracked out the araldite and the bus bars are all glued on, and it's time for my favourite bit. Oh, how I look forward to this bit. Threading almost invisible strands of wire onto the bus bars with my big ham-fisted fingers. It's like trying to tie your shoelaces while wearing hazmat gloves. Soldering every single cell, all 112 of them, on both sides of the brick. 344 solder joints on every brick. Taking care not to heat up the cells too much with the soldering iron. Oh joy, oh rapturous joy. And at the end of all that, you have a finished brick. Now it just needs to be charged and balanced, but that's for another video, I think. Then it can be plugged into the power cabinet along with all its friends, and that's another kilowatt hour of energy storage ready for use. I hope you found this video informative and entertaining. Take care out there, you all. This has been John Gill.